parts of you, and for others will become clear very soon. Helen is the spouse of John Peters, who you may have seen an interview earlier today on our channels with. And of course, John was taken hostage during Op Granby. But it always seems to us that absolutely everything that John went through was just completely horrendous, awful, and it's a tale that you need a bit of a strong stomach to listen to. But I think often people forget that we have our fantastic frontline people in their fast jet aircraft doing everything that they've been well trained to do, etc., putting themselves in harm's way. I think people often, though, forget about the sacrifice that families back home and others around that person who's in the RAF, the challenges they face. So I think that's why it's really important that we're talking to Helen today. Helen, do you have a view about that, about this kind of idea that people always focus on the brave fighter?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it's sort of the way it is, isn't it? That you know, that the focus, I mean, correctly, has to be on the people doing the doing. But I think it is lovely, and thank you for asking me to be involved today. You know, there is a whole other aspect, and it is those people who are doing the you know, the standing and the waiting. You know, be they wives, be they husbands, be they just, you know, family, mums, dads, kids, the whole thing. And they can sometimes be a little bit forgotten.
So Helen, just take us back 30 years then to the start of Op Granby. Tell us a little bit about you and John, where you were living, your family, etc.
Okay. Yeah, so we were at RAF Larbrook in Germany. John and I had met actually at university. I mean, literally the second day of university. So we'd known each other since 1980, got married in 1985 and moved out to Larbrook in 89 with our son, Guy, who'd been born 1988. So, and funnily enough, 3rd of October, which ultimately became German Unification Day, but not until a bit later. And so we were at RAF Larbrook, and I had given birth to our second child, to our daughter, Tony, literally at the end of August. And there, basically, from the minute that Tony was born, I mean, John was already on notice that he was likely to be going out as part of Operation Granby. So I'd got a little boy of less than 2 and a daughter who literally was only weeks old when John was sent off to Bahrain.
And how prepared did you feel at that time? I mean, how much was it a huge reality that he was likely to be put into harm's way?
I think it was all a little bit unreal, because it was all quite a whirlwind. It all seemed to happen very fast. And although anybody, you know, joining the military, you obviously understand the risks. But if people can take their minds back, actually, the first Gulf War, or Operation Granby, was actually the first time that the RAF really had been involved in a major conflict in that way, almost since the end of the Second World War. You know, we'd had the Falklands, of course. That was very much the Navy, predominantly the Navy. And funnily enough, I can remember, I mean, John and I, that was sort of roughly 81, 82. And I can remember being at university, I'd already knowing John and thinking, flipping heck, if this was happening in a few years' time, John could be involved in this. And I think that was when it first dawned on me. And suddenly here I was having my own sort of Falklands, which was sort of, you know, a bit surprising.
And I guess compared to the Falklands, the media coverage was entirely different. In the Falklands, it took a little bit of time for news to get back to the UK, but it felt, I think, for Op Granby, for Gulf War I, that it was almost, you know, it's the start of 24/7 coverage, and we were hearing about stuff in live time. how did that make you feel sitting with your very young family in Germany?
It had all sorts of added challenges because, yes, it was the first sort of fully televised war. If you were sitting in your, in your home in the UK with full access to BBC, ITV, whatever, I wasn't. I was on RAF Larbrook. We had, oh gosh, I can't even remember what it was called now.
BFBS? Did you have BFBS?
Thank you, BFBS. Yeah. That was our only source of television. So it was quite limited, and we got news, a couple of times a day. As you got your 6 o'clock news, and you got some news in the morning. The rest of the time, for me, it was Fireman Sam and Bob the Builder and whatever was going on at the time, or various different, videos. We didn't have DVDs, videos at that time that was playing. So part of the time, suddenly I'd get a telephone call from somebody with the very best intentions from the UK. Oh, Helen, have you just seen this? Oh, Helen, have you just seen that? This has happened, that's happened. Obviously, I wasn't getting that because I hadn't got access to 4-hour television coverage. I was only getting, a relatively small feed every day.
If you don't mind, I know it's not the greatest thing to have to kind of remember and relive, but are you able to talk us through how you discovered that John's aircraft had gone down and that he was likely to be a prisoner of war?
So you have to remember, actually, John, the 2 Johns, they were shot down literally on the first day, the second wave. So it was, if I remember rightly, yes, it was a Sunday evening. And I suddenly got a telephone call from one of the neighbours, Sonia Teakle, whose husband, Paddy, squadron leader Paddy Teakle at the time, was down with John. And Sonia just rang and said, girls, it started, it started. And so we all zoomed round the corner to Sonia's, baby monitors in hand, because we're all on the base, everybody was there. So and all the baby monitors worked within 2 or 3 houses. So we all went round to Sonia's and were just sort of absolutely fixated on the television for that bit of time. Until we got to the stage, I don't know, it was 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was like, well, what else can we do? So went off home. And the next day I just sort of went about my day as normal. Monday, that meant going to a gym class where I took the kids to the little nursery and blah, blah, blah. Got back from the gym and literally just walked in the house and the telephone rang, and it was Maggie Broadbent. So that was the squadron boss's wife, so John Broadbent's wife. And she just said to me, oh, Helen, I've been trying to get you. Is it okay if I pop round? So immediately you think, that's interesting. Why is Maggie calling me? Now, Maggie, like most of the wives, our main form of transport around the base was our bicycles, and we'd have a kiddie seat at the front and a kiddie seat on the back, and we'd cycle around. And I don't know why, but I just thought in my head, right, okay, if Maggie comes around on her bike, then, okay, it's sort of okay. Maybe she needs me to go with her somewhere else. If she's not on her bike, then, okay, that might be something different. And of course, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and I didn't even notice who was standing at the door. All I can remember seeing is the station commander's car with the flag on it. So that meant official business. And then I looked at who was standing at the doorstop, and obviously it was Maggie, and it was Neil Buckland, the RAF Larbrook station commander. So then I knew it was probably a bit more serious. And I just remember Maggie saying, Helen, it's okay, it's okay. I don't know if I'm making this. She may have said he's not dead. I can't remember. I just remember saying it's okay, it's okay. But John's plane didn't come back, or John didn't come back off the sortie, or something like that. And then obviously they came in the house, and all sorts of other conversations then took place.
And what support? I mean, there's the official support. There are some bits and pieces in place, but I can imagine personally that would be lovely. But I think it would be my friends, that the people in similar situations, the other spouses around me, that would probably I would be then turning to. How was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, obviously, you know, at that moment in time, I was the only one because it was day one of the Gulf War.
And John Nichols didn't have, I believe.
John wasn't married, so he didn't have, and he didn't, and you know, irrespective of not being married, he didn't have a long-term girlfriend or anything like that at that time. And obviously, even if he did, they were in England. They weren't living on the base in Larbrook. So I was very much, there was only me at a particular time going through this experience. My neighbours and everything were, you know, were incredible. They were my friends, and they were really, really supportive. But I have to say that the station itself, that Larbrook, was amazing. Neil Buckland as the station commander was exemplary. He was brilliant. And he started briefings every day. And my understanding is he had to fight really hard to get agreement from those upstairs to brief the whole station, because he was determined that he was going to do the briefings. He wasn't going to delegate it to somebody more junior. He, as the station commander, took responsibility for briefing his station. And that to him meant everybody. It didn't matter whether you were an officer's family, or a more junior ranks family. He wanted everybody to be given the same information and shown the same respect. You know, everybody we were all in this together. And I, you know, I really respect him for that. And the only time, and this was 7 days a week, he did this for the whole time. I think he missed about 2 briefings. And that was mainly because he himself had an accident about a week or so in, when he managed to break his ankle. So he spent about, I don't know how many days of all, when this was all going on crutches as well, just to add to the stresses and strains. But no, the station was there. They were very supportive. And so John had, you know, it had all started on the Sunday. John was actually shot down on the Monday. And we didn't really know much more until the Thursday, which was when they were paraded on television. But it had already been agreed that there would be a family happy hour on the Friday, given an edict that this was going to be a ladies' happy hour and that all the wives were welcome on the Friday. And then, of course, you know, this happened, and Neil said, well, right, I'll cancel that, and blah, 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 blah. And I can just remember saying, don't you dare cancel that. You know, if anything, the wives need this more now than they ever did. It must go ahead. I will be there, and you're buying me the first gin and tonic. And it sort of went on from there. And I think that was the one thing funny enough, John and I watched Military Wives recently, the film. We hadn't seen it before. And I thought that was one bit that they really got spot on. And after the young guy was killed, and the young wife, and they were supposed to be doing a concert, and they were going to cancel it. They felt out of respect. And she stood up there and she said, no, you know, the way you can respect me and my, you know, my late husband is by going ahead with the concert, being out there and showing everybody. And I thought that was absolutely spot on, because certainly that was my reaction as well.
Kind of taking a stand almost in the same way that, you know, the bravery, different kinds of bravery.
Yeah.
And so going back then to the night before that happy hour, which is, you know, it sticks in everyone's memory, that footage, those photos. Did you watch it that night?
Again, that was one of the ones that was a bit strange, because 8 o'clock in the morning on the news, it came through that there was footage of that they were being paraded on television. And it said there were 7 POWs and et cetera, et cetera. So sat there and watched it. and they didn't show John. And there was actually only five people there was footage of. Mo Mubarak, who was the Kuwaiti gentleman, wasn't shown, and John wasn't shown. So I didn't know what that meant, because, you know, John Nichol was shown, but there wasn't anything of my John. And obviously the time went on, and, you know, lunchtime news, etc. Anyway, then just before the 6 o'clock news, I had a telephone call again from the station commander saying, Helen, just to let you know, there's going to be footage on the 6 o'clock news, and John is on this bit. So I watched that, and, you know, it's funny going back, because obviously at the time, up until then, I didn't know whether he was alive or dead. So everybody goes, oh my God, that must have been awful. It must have been so shocking. It must have been this, it must have been that. Actually, I'd just been desperate to see him. So for me, it was really good. It was positive. Well, I know at this point in time, he is alive whenever that footage was taken. And I could work out from the amount of stubble, and John tends to chew his lips when he's nervous, and the way he looked, over and above, obviously, the bruises and this, that, and the other. I thought that had been taken probably within a relatively short time of them putting it out there, which proved to be the case. So that was 6 o'clock. So there was that missing, and it's funny, nobody has ever been able to confirm to me one way or another whether the BBC or sorry, the news people only to show 5 people up until the 6 o'clock. Maybe they thought it would be too upsetting to show John. Maybe, I don't know. Nobody told me whether somebody had made an editorial decision not to show that bit of footage, or whether it was released at a separate time. I have no idea. I've taken 30 years and nobody's ever been able to answer me that.
I can imagine the relief, but also a real kind of mixture of emotions at that point, because he's looking that he's in the state that he's in. I can imagine there would be lots of John's family and friends probably wanting to talk to you about that. Did you find that you were fielding, first of all, how did you have to tell John's family that he'd been,
yes,
that his aircraft hadn't come back? And
yes,
how did that work? Were you having loads of phone calls? Was that helping? Was that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I rang John's brother. So when Maggie and the station commander had left, I actually rang John's brother. And so I left it to John's brother, his older brother, to contact his parents. His sister was actually traveling at the time. I think she was in Australia somewhere, but she was traveling. And yeah, so I very much sort of left it to Mark to do that. And then over the course of that week, yeah, but there was, I mean, I had my neighbours and everything. The girls all rallied round, as you can imagine. So I think for about the first 3 or 4 days, I was never alone. If any, it got to the stage, it was like, for God's sake, everybody, can you leave me alone? But there was somebody, they even stayed overnight and everything, as much as anything to help me, because obviously, as I say, Guy was only 2, Tony was sort of 7 weeks old, 8 weeks old, bit older, 3 months or so. And obviously, like lots of mums, I'm breastfeeding, I'm potty training, I'm doing all these other things. We've got to remember to eat at some point, right? Yeah, things like that. So so there was nearly always people in the house fielding telephone calls and making sure I did or did not want to speak to these various different people. So yeah, there was lots of people who were very, very good.
Helping you handle that. And we just talked about the media. You were in Germany, but I still am, and you were on base, which obviously was helping as well. I mean, at that point, I can imagine it was slightly different to how it would be today, but was there a huge amount of media intrusion, or was that again being handled elsewhere and not really impinging directly on you at that point?
You've actually summed it up very well. I was incredibly lucky. I was on the base. I was behind the wire. They couldn't get at me. You know, again, I found out subsequently that there was all sorts of things in the local towns where they were, you know, they would just sort of try and work out anybody who looked like an Air Force wife family, and they'd be making up all sorts of stories just so that they could try and get in their car to get onto the base and everything. But I never got any direct contact. But our families, both John's family and they actually found my family before they found John's family, which again is just one of those funny stories, really, in that one of my school friends, very good school friends, who had, you know, who had knew that it was John who was in the plane. She happened to be overheard at work because she was quite a bit upset. So she happened to be overheard at work that her friend's husband was one of the pilots, etc. And one of the people who overheard her, that person's boyfriend happened to work for the Birmingham Post and Mail, and he knew that Sarah had previously gone out with another chap called Phil, who had actually been an ex-boyfriend of mine. So basically, it took almost no time at all for them to work out who John was, because, you know, they just went and saw Phil, and Phil went, oh, well, it must be John Peters, blah, 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 blah. So they were camped outside my mum and dad's house really quickly. And, you know, before they actually found out who John was, and started sort of harassing his parents as well. So, yeah, I mean, it was the classic, you know, jumping over the fence at the back of the garden and taking refuge in neighbours' houses and, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Not what you need when you're going through something horrendous anyway. So by that time, as you just mentioned, there were, you know, other prisoners of war, other RAF prisoners of war. Did you know their families as well already? So
most of them I didn't get to know. I mean, obviously, the main thing that happened directly for me was on the 14th of February, because that's when Rupert Clark and Steve Hicks were shot down, who were also from RAF Larbrook. And so that, and I knew Sue quite well, which is Rupert Clark's wife. And, you know, she was pregnant, expecting their first baby. And, you know, so that was sort of obviously very, very close to home. You know, most of the other POWs, you know, were stationed elsewhere. They were either at Bruggen or they were in the UK. So I didn't really know them. And the first time I met the sort of the Bruggen ladies, because they got to hear about Neil Buckland's briefings at RAF Larbrook, and therefore they came up to Larbrook to listen to one of the briefings, etc. And I, you know, met them then. And also we had, as did all the stations, you know, we had visitors, you know, the Kinnocks came, and you know, we had all sorts of people. So often then, and the Red Cross came, and then often they would sort of bring the families together for some of those sort of more personal meetings.
Yeah. I imagine that the absolute lifeblood at that point for you was information, and I imagine it was quite patchy. How did that evolve as we went through towards, you know, and you know, I guess the sort of closing parts was sort of a month or so, was it later?
Well, 6-7 weeks. I think John was in captivity from the 17th of January till the 2nd of March, 4th of March, something like that. And so sort of roughly 7 weeks. But no, I just 100% relied on station commander and also Dave Woozy, our intelligence officer, who was the other part of the team that delivered the daily briefings.
Yeah.
So, you know, Dave was the intelligence officer. He would then brief Neil Buckland. They would both stand up and they would answer the questions. And if I had any queries, if I got random telephone calls with people or somebody. I made it a policy. I never bought a newspaper. I never looked at any newspapers. I never looked at any reports. I never read any of it, because 90% of it was
speculation and rubbish.
Rubbish. If anything did filter through to me that I was not sure about, I would contact Dave, or I had an open line to Neil Buckland. And in fact, he used to come to the house for the first couple of weeks or so. He would come to the house every single evening. In fact, I used to tease him, because the houses at RA Larbrook, they sort of backed onto each other, had long thin gardens backed onto each other. And the station commander's house was sort of two sort of lots of houses away from us. But he tended to come in over the back and through the back because he didn't want
the fence.
People, well, he didn't want people to keep seeing him come to my door and everything, because then you get all, what's going on. So he'd come incognito sort of thing over that garden and knock on the door. And he had this amazing sense of timing in the fact, I think I just mentioned to you that I was obviously breastfeeding my daughter at the time. You could bet your life that as soon as I plugged Tony on, the little knock on the window, and I just used the tea. I said, "Oh, Neil, yeah, no, I know why you're here," So, but yeah, no, he was brilliant. So
it sounds like, when information is that important to you, he sounds like he did an amazing job.
Oh, he did. And he would say, look, and what was really good is they also explained that sometimes even the powers at be would be putting out disinformation. So it's not necessarily that what was being reported was being in any way made up by the press or changed. Sometimes they'd actually been fed that information because that's the information we wanted the press to be reporting.
Yeah.
So I would be being told sometimes something slightly different, confidentially, just so that, just so that I knew what might be going on behind some of these news stories.
Yeah. So the kind of uncertainty in your head must have got even worse when it became apparent that there was now a possibility, the conflict was, ended, the official phase had ended, that perhaps release might be imminent. Can you just talk us through that sort of end of, it's not an end in itself, but that sort of that
well, my father actually raised a question in the House. He actually got Jill Knight, who was the local MP for Edgbaston at the time, Dame Jill Knight, and she actually raised it in Parliament, which meant that it was pronounced that there could be no cessation of hostilities until the Iraqis had either given back the known prisoners of war. So obviously that's where it was very positive that the two Johns had been on television, because they'd shown the world that they'd got these guys. So now they needed to either give them back, or they needed to prove what had happened to them in the interim. So that had been, that was part of the negotiations before the end of the war. But then obviously, what happened when they were released, again, was all a bit of a surprise. I got a phone call, early in the morning, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. A good friend, a friend who'd gone through initial officer training with John, a gentleman called Brian Bridge, and obviously Air Force, and he rang, he said, and he was saying, "Helen, I've just seen John get off an aircraft." But by that stage, it was like, I don't want to know. I haven't been told anything. I've not been told anything official. I'm sorry, Brian, I don't want to be rude, but I don't know anything. I've not seen anything. I've not heard anything, in a way, go away. Anyway, I'd got Mark, John's brother, and his wife were staying with me at the time. So Mark said, "Right, Helen, leave it with me. I'll go and see what I can find out." So he went off to find Dave Woozy, and Dave Woozy, the intelligence officer, was amazing, and he played Mark, my brother-in-law, the news footage, and he even let Mark borrow the bit of video and bring it back to the house. So Mark put the bit of video, you know, he put it in the machine, played it. And Guy, who, as I say, at the time was 2, just ran up to the television going, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." So, that's where, you know, again, one of the amusing in hindsight, because it took me over 12 hours to convince the Air Force that that was John. Because at the time, if you remember, he was in his yellow suit, he'd got the beard, he'd got this, his hair was long, etc. And they said, no, the Red Cross have confirmed there are definitely no RAF personnel that have been released. And I said, well, I can tell you now that one of them is John. And I said, don't just take my word, his 2-year-old son knows him. So sorry, Red Cross, you don't know what you're talking about, because that is John. And funnily enough, John's ID card at the time, I don't know when he'd had it taken, but it must have been a time that all the barbers were on strike or something, because on his ID card, he looked actually quite large, and he had a moustache at the time on his ID card. So I took that round as well and said, look at that, and look at that footage, and you're telling me that's not John. Anyway, I do understand that they have to wait until they've got everything absolutely slammed, because you don't want to disappoint people.
No, false hope.
It was a bit crazy that a 2-year-old could identify, but the whole of the military junk or whatever was still absolutely adamant that it wasn't him.
So once everyone finally agreed that it really was John, what happened next? I mean, I don't want to intrude on private moments of, you know, you being reunited, but he was flown.
Well, that took a while, because obviously that was just John getting as far as sort of being handed over. So then the girls descended, and there was a bit of a party. During the festivities, the telephone rang, and one of the more junior pilots on 15 Squadron, Tatch, was at the house as well. So he answered the phone, and he came in and he said, "Oh, Helen, John's on the phone." And I went, "John who?" And he went, "John." I said, "John?" I went, "What?" Because the most mundane sort of, I just didn't expect suddenly the phone to ring and John to phone. And he was phoning from Cyprus. He was in the hospital in Cyprus, and he was phoning, and it was just like, "Oh, hello." Okay.
No preparation for the moment.
No, absolutely. So that's where the famous story comes from, with me saying, "Have you still got your balls then?" Because probably a couple of glasses of wine had been drunk. But also, long story, and I'm not going to go into all of that now, but there had been a bit of banter between John Nichol and my John about if they were captured, you know, what would happen if it had their balls cut off, and all sorts of awful things happening. So it was my way of making sure John was John, as in he sort of, when I said to him, "Have you still got your balls then?" he would immediately answer, knowing the conversations that had happened, so the whole way he answered that question would give me that sort of tick that, yeah, he's okay.
And then you saw him face to face. Obviously, you had a little bit more preparation for that. He didn't just randomly walk through the door.
Yes, though unfortunately, I mean, this is where he could have done a better acting job, because he was in Cyprus being assessed, making sure that he was okay. So, you know, I was up in the loft. They were going to fly me to Cyprus with the children, and of course, it was March, so it was all get the summer clothes out, get all this, that, and the other, and just about ready. And then I got a phone call saying, "Helen, it's all right. No, we're bringing him straight back to Germany. He's fine." I thought, you bastard, you know, you could have at least put it on for a few days. I could have done with a few days in Cyprus. That would have been nice. But they then flew him back to Germany. But you know, you're right. And again, this is where I can't praise actually what the Air Force did highly enough, because there was obviously big media interest here, and they did allow, the press were really clamoring to see, and John was released slightly ahead of a lot of the others, so the press were just like all over it, and so they were allowed to come and film him arriving, etc. And he was met by the CNC of Germany, Chief in Charge of Germany, Neil Buckland, station commander. But they actually said, look, we're going to be at the bottom of the steps for John to come down. You and the children, we're going to have in a room in the in one of the units just off the pan. And at first I thought, oh no, I want to be, and then they said, look, Helen, it's probably going to be quite emotional. And John, there's going to be all the journalists there, all the photographers there. He's got to meet the CNC and the stage. We would suggest you have a private reunion, and then you can come out and do what it would be lovely if you could then come out and do a family picture. Yes. And once they explained it to me like that, I thought, actually, that is very sensible.
Yeah.
And certainly talking to John after, he was really pleased we did that, because he said he was able to sort of hold it together, coming down the steps, being, it's all official, CNC and stage, hats on, full uniform, etc. As soon as he got in, with us, then it was
could be the human,
a bit more emotional, more emotional. Gotcha. And then it meant they basically said, look, take as long as you want, but then it would be great to have. So I think we probably had a good, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes or something. And then that's when we then went out, and there's the photograph of me with John and me holding Tony, John holding Guy, and doing that whole family reunion bit.
And it sort of feels that must have been the end of a chapter of the drama, the crisis, the not knowing chapter. But that's not the end by any means, because John's gone through some really awful circumstances and situations. You've had an awful lot of turmoil, stress, uncertainty. It's terrible. It must have been quite a long journey then. And do you think that's something you were prepared for? That it wasn't just going to be necessary. I'm not saying that life was difficult afterwards. I'm just saying it's never a fairy tale ending and it's all flowers from then on, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, it was weird, because again, as you say, then it's mass media attention. And even though we were protected through a lot of it, there was also, the Air Force also wanted John, and John Nichol to a certain extent, and the others to do some interviews and to do some stuff. We had actually joked when he first came back that, God, the way this is going, next thing we know, we're going to be on the flipping Wogan show. And the next thing we were on the Wogan show, actually on my birthday, 26th of March. But, and that was, we'd said that to each as a joke, as a complete joke. And suddenly there we are, at that time, Wogan was the biggest thing, it was, I suppose equivalent to sort of Graham Norton these days. But yeah, so, but there were difficulties as well, because there were John's experience was one experience of Gulf War One. There were so many other people who had different experiences, who every day had to get back into their cockpits and go and do the job again. And their families every day, had the fear of, would they come back? Would they be shot down? Would they become prisoners of war?
Looking back, Helen, on that really awful 7-8 weeks when John was a prisoner of war, and then the challenges, obviously, of him coming home and normal life resuming after that. If you had to sort of summarise the key thing that got you through that really difficult period, what would it be?
I think I was incredibly lucky that I'd got the children, because a lot of people, the first thing they go is, oh my goodness, that must have been awful, with 2 young children. No, I think that was my saving. Because any family will know with 2 young children your first priority is the children. So the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, you know, you've got to look after the kids, you've got to be feeding the children, and they need to be kept in their routine. And by keeping them in their routine, you're in a routine. It also means that you're not just sitting there, you know, and I do know there were some of the girls who pretty much literally just sat there every day watching the bit of news they could watch, ringing people back in the UK to find out more information, waiting for those telephone calls, and driving themselves crackers. Whereas the wives who've got kids to look after, dogs to walk, this, that, and the other, I think that helped, because you've got distractions and you've got other things to be concentrating on. You know, and you're also, to a extent, I mean, mine, you know, obviously Tony as a baby was completely oblivious. Guy, we just made sure we kept things, generally speaking, we kept things away from him, just in case. So yes, he saw that clip of John getting off the plane, but it was, he wasn't in the room when they first showed John, and he was protected from that image. And even the little boy you see, Alex Woods, who lived next door, he was only 7, maybe 8 by then. He was really upset by seeing that photograph. And, you know, and a lot of those, the children needed to be slightly protected. But no, you know, actually, as I say, having the children, it meant I could concentrate on that. And in a selfish way, it then actually helped me being in Larbrook. I hadn't got lots of family to, other than the children. I hadn't got to be trying to look after the rest of the family, and you know, John's brother and his wife, etc. You know, I left it to them, their responsibility to look after John's mum and dad, really. You know, I would keep my mum and dad as informed as I could, but sometimes having really close connections right there can actually be more. Obviously, it's fantastic having support, but at the same time, sometimes you end up having to spend more energy looking after them than you're getting from them looking after you. So from that point of view, I think it was, you know, I could be quite selfish and insular and just concentrate on me and the children and take one day at a time from that point of view.
But I imagine that having that RAF community around you, that those RAF friends around you and their partners, spouses, was really helpful in that way.
Oh, absolutely, because they did, as I say, they might not be going through exactly the experience, but they were the ones who were having to think, yeah, but is my husband the one who's next going to be in this situation? You know, they were the ones, and they've got to keep their families together, and they've got to keep their children, you know, to a certain extent protected and shielded and you know, safe from getting too concerned about what was going on, and that their dads would be coming home, etc. So, but yeah, I mean, it just reminded me of what it must have been like. You know, our parents talk about the war times and how communities came together and everything. And, you know, sometimes you think, how could they have been having fun? How could they have been laughing and this, that, and the other? But actually, you have to have those releases.
Thank you so much, Helen Peters, for joining us today. That's a really fascinating insight, you know, into sort of perhaps a more unknown aspect of the story of John Nichols and the other prisoners of war during Op Granby. It's been a real privilege to have you with us today. And I'd also just like to take the time to say thank you to both you and John for being, as ambassadors for the RAF Association, just as fantastic supporters for you, great friends, and we're so glad that you continue to play such an integral kind of role within our RAF community. So Helen, on behalf of the RAF Association and everyone watching today, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And, you know, obviously we're the lucky ones, we're the lucky families. And on behalf of certainly of 15 Squadron, you know, I'd like to send out my love to Lynn Hicks, because her husband, Steve, unfortunately was not one that came home. So our love to Steve.